Welcome, everyone. We'll get started here in a minute. Okay, I think we'll get started because we have a lot to cover today. Welcome, everyone, to today's webinar, which is Exploring Black-Built Modernist Buildings Along Benning Road. My name is Zachary Burt, and I'm the Community Outreach and Grants Manager at the DC Preservation League. For those of you who may be new to DCPL, we are Washington, D.C.'s citywide nonprofit focused on historic preservation since 1971. And I'd like to take a moment to just thank our top sponsors whose annual financial support helps underwrite programs like today's webinar. That is the DC Commission on the Arts and Humanities, Douglas Development Corporation, QTAC Rock, Antunovich Associates, Beyer Blinder Bell, EHT Traceries, and KCE Structural Engineers, as well as many other organizations and individuals throughout the district. Thank you so much. And before we get started today, I just want to go over how today will work logistically. Please use the Q&A function or the comment box at the bottom of the screen, and feel free to ask questions or make comments throughout the presentation, and then we will get to those at the end and get Imania's feedback on your various thoughts and questions. And with that said, let me introduce today's speaker, Imania Price. I'm going to stop sharing and allow you to put up your slides, Imania. Imania Price is a historic preservation specialist with the District of Columbia State Historic Preservation Office. She holds a master's degree in historic preservation from the University of Maryland, College Park. In her current role, Imania works to protect and celebrate the city's rich architectural and cultural heritage by reviewing projects for compliance with preservation laws, conducting research on historic properties, and collaborating with community stakeholders to ensure that development respects DC's historic character. Passionate about making history relevant and accessible, she strives to highlight underrepresented narratives and connect communities to the stories embedded in the built environment. She prefers to focus her work on the importance of documentation and the preservation of African American historic sites in and around Washington, D.C. Imania, welcome. It's good to see you.
Good to see you as well. Hello, everybody. As Zach said, I am Imania Price. I am a historic preservation specialist. I've been working in the DMV area since 2016, 2017. I was born in Washington, D.C. and grew up in Prince George's County. So I am familiar with the area as well as with Northeast D.C. I became interested in this area when I started working with the Historic Preservation Office. We have a number of historic districts in Washington, D.C. You might know a few of them as Capitol Hill or U Street. But there was a lack of historic districts in Ward 7 and 8. And so when I came on board, we were just designating Keenan Park as a historic district in Northeast. We also did Berry Farms around the same time. And so it wasn't that there was a lack of historic significance, because there definitely wasn't a lack of character of buildings and styles. And so I kind of dedicated my time to exploring that space and trying to educate and just promote preservation in Ward 7 among these different styles of properties. And so as we move forward, I'm going to actually make sure that this work. Perfect. And so I'm just going to jump right into it. I want to say thank you to all of those who were going to come out and brave the cold air with me. This was originally supposed to be a walking tour down Bunning Road. Not to say that Benny Road is the only space with this collection of historic buildings, but I just really was fond of the styles that you see along the road, and so it was a really beautiful day to go, but I did not want us tramping the wind and ice for it. So I hope you can join us at a later date when we can actually make it out there to walk it. But in the meantime, I'm going to do my best to try to convey that sense of wonder that you would get walking and convey as much information as I can. Go ahead and put a thumbs up if you guys are familiar with Benning Road or if you are familiar with just the architecture among Northeast DC. I wanted to focus this talk on Black modernism and architecture and give it some dates, a time period. A lot of times you see modernism talks mostly at the turn of the 1900s or the 20th century. We're going to localize the dates to 1920s to 1970s. That's the time period we're going to be looking at our properties or buildings within. And it actually gives a good sense of the architects that were living in Northeast and working there as well. The 20s and 30s, you really see a boom of construction and in African American communities. So, why was DC a magnet for Black architects? Starting with the education, there were two local high schools or two high schools in Washington, DC that was premier for African American youth, and that was M Street School and Armstrong Technical High School, both open in the early 1900s. And they go on to educate a variety of African American leaders throughout its history. The Armstrong Technical High School, you'll notice, will come up a lot for our architects as being the where they started their career, their trade career. And then from there, you also notice a feeder into the Howard School of Howard University School of Architecture, which begins hiring several architects for their campus, as well as teachers within the school. So from there, we also talk about World War II and World War One, and how the GI Bill and the opportunities for African American men to go across seas, learn and experience a different culture of building when the World War One was going on, apologize. The opportunities for African American men in ranks was relegated often to the construction corps or the engineering corps. So they really got a lot of experience working with construction. And then from there, they would take the GI Bill and go and get an education from a local, from university. University of Illinois, Cornell, MIT were all listed as the education hubs for African American architects. We have the government opportunities that are abound in DC that really draws a lot of architects from around the country to DC to try to get these government incentives and funding. for construction. And then there is that layer of segregation. We'll talk about how segregation impacted development with African American communities, but it also provided so much opportunities for architects and builders and designers to really build within their community. And so we see that, and then we also see the lean into public housing. So we'll talk all about that. And then I just wanted to kind of give you some names that will pop up. John A. Langford, our first African American licensed architect in DC. He's licensed in 1924. And then we see a slew of other architects after him receiving their license, but that doesn't mean just because he was licensed then he wasn't building before. His first building, or one of his most prominent buildings in Washington, D.C., is the True Reformer Building on U Street, built in 1908. And so he is known as the Dean of Architecture. And if we're talking about kind of the time period, he would be a contemporary of Frank Lloyd Wright, who would be around the same age and same period. We have John Whitelaw Lewis. He's our Black real estate developer, most known for in DC for the Whitelaw Hotel down on U Street. But he also is responsible for the Industrial Bank company. And then he also expands into establishing a real estate company who goes and creates communities out in Northeast. And so he was influential in establishing a lot of the neighborhoods that we're going to talk about. And then other architect names that we'll come across include Giles, Archer, Cassell, Dodd. These are all African American architects who built along Northeast. So I know that was a lot of information that I threw at you, but I just want to kind of establish where we are and how we got here. So if we were actually out in the outdoors, we would be taking our tour route from Benning Road, starting at East Capitol. We're walking just straight up past 44th. We're going to pass Fort Benham Park. We're going to come to the corner where there's the Safeway and the library. And then we're going to make a right and go up towards Minnesota Avenue Metro Station. So it was a nice about 30-minute walk that we would do, but I'll try to give you as much images and photos as I can about what we will see. Oh, and the styles along the route too. I think that's important to show you, and the development, because we're going to see one of the biggest things about preservation is how to preserve and have development at the same time. And so we'll see how development or increased pressure to develop impacts our historic resources. So before Benning Road, or before this 1920s world, we have a rural beginning. Northeast wasn't necessarily a part of the downtown DC core. Once you start expanding out towards Maryland, you start to see landowners with large plantations all around DC. And so they owned a very large part of Dean, Sheriff. There was another plantation with the Talbots. And so these large plantation owners would end up selling off their plantations after the Civil War, and you start to see them being subdivided into different spaces, but they really doesn't take off until around the 1920s. Around the 1910s, you would still even see fruit trees and orchards and all of that, embodying a more agricultural space. But one of the attractions that it did have along Benning Road was the Benning Road Racetrack. And the Benning Racetrack was a premier racetrack in Washington, D.C. It opened in 1890 and hosted a variety of events. They had horse racing, auto cars, motorcycles, airplanes, you name it, people were betting on it. It operated under segregated, DC was segregated, so it operated under segregation laws or Jim Crow laws. So it was a white track. Numerous reports of incidents happened there. I'm sure with betting and all of that, it could attract a lot of unsavory characters at times. But one of the racial issues that I wanted to bring up was this article here on our right about runaway at Benning, and it was talking about just different issues that was going on at the track. And one of them was there was a automobile race, a car race. And when the drivers were presenting their cars, they were walking around. The folks noticed that one of the drivers, I think they called him a light colored individual, was walking his car. And no one said anything then, but after a while, they asked the owner of the car, who was the president of Rick's Bank, if he had a Negro as his driver, to which he said yes. And so they dinged him. They said that he had to pay a fine and that he wasn't allowed to drive if he wanted to participate. And so the president of the bank said that's okay, and didn't return back to the racetrack. And so it was a really just incident of one incident of the kind of racial tensions that were going along at the time. This was taken in 1908, and then afterwards the track closes. And so it really just cemented it, but it kind of kept in operation as kind of this illegal kind of space of racing and betting. So that's going on the opposite side of Minnesota Avenue. But as we kind of move out of 1908 and into our New Deal era, our Roosevelt era, after the Great Depression, we're really looking to revitalize the area. DC is going through a period of revitalization and kind of management where there's an effort to reduce undesirable conditions within the city. So this is when you see the Alley Resettlement Authority coming through and really relocating folks and demolishing things. You also see the Public Works Administration, sponsored by the New Deal, paving and repairing different spaces, particularly one along Benning Road. And so you'll start to see how the New Deal influenced construction and in response boomed construction workers and laborers from African American communities. So I think we covered all of that. Let's get started. So when we first meet up on our walking tour, we're walking in front of Benning Road Metro Station. This is at its groundbreaking in 1962. I believe it opens in 1978, 72-ish. And then from there, you see kind of this fluid development going along the area. The neighborhoods that kind of encircle Benning Road or Marshall Heights, Deanwood, Benning Road, Benning Heights, and Capitol Frew, Debris Village. And don't know how we lost the name Debris Village. I think it is a really great name to honor Oscar Stanton Debris. And if you're not familiar with who he is, he was the first African American to be elected into Congress in the 20th century. He was a representative from Illinois, and he was responsible for an amendment that barred discrimination within the Civil Conservation Corps. That was part of FDR's plan for the New Deal. And so it really got a lot of construction workers into the CCC. And so I don't know how that name left us, but also bringing it back. This here, I wanted to talk about kind of the black and white divide. Racism and segregation is pretty hot right now in 1920. And so by 1930s, during our New Deal Act, or era, the Federal Housing Administration is established to really take charge of housing and mapping out areas to ensure that more housing is developed, to support the influx of workers coming into the district. And so there is a grading system that they use. And in this grading system, African American spaces are, as you can see, is areas in the G areas in red represent the lowest grade of residential property, as designed for use of persons of white persons. And then F are areas that are showing effect of Negro occupancy. Many of the structures are in poor condition and rapidly turning into slums. And then H areas are developed especially for Negroes or have been left open for Negroes to build for themselves. And so this H area, as you can see here, where Fort Man is your H area. So they're really giving um, an area for African Americans to develop their own space. And then here you kind of have white residents who have already been living here and probably interracially living with African Americans. And so this just kind of shows how close the divide was. But also, if you look at this insurance map, or this newspaper article. The newspaper article is talking about how they're suing DC for rezoning their land for African Americans. They felt that that was kind of reverse prejudice, and they shouldn't have to just still allow for African American builders. So a very interesting case. They lost, and yeah, the area was developed for colored apartments. So we're betting on Black then. While the FHA might have listed it as undesirable conditions or slums, that was not the perspective from African Americans themselves. They were very aware of their conditions. They were very aware of what they were dealing with as far as civic planning was concerned. And so they really came together to advocate and create their own realty groups, real estate agents, builders, houses. As you can see here, we have John A. Langford making a statement about Capitol View and his endorsement of the community. They're building churches, they're building schools, they're encouraging people to buy and invest into these communities. You have the Breeze Village and Capitol View advertising in newspapers. And then right here in the 1940s, 1944, we see an article in the Afro-American about Washington moving east. And this is kind of talking about the real change that comes from 1940s development in Northwest, pushing folks more east. They said down here, the colored population is moving out of the overcrowded Northwest into other sections on the rim of town where there's more room. And it looks like a colored Times Square with a few whites mingling in, just to kind of give you a sense of what it might have looked like at the time. So finally, we're getting to our buildings. So the shrimp boat, we are now we're looking towards East Capitol, and we're looking at our local landmark. And the shrimp boat was established and built in 1952. It was a product of Wilmore Morris, who was a seafood reseller. He owned properties around DC for restaurants and I think also at the wharf. Um, he did cater to African American clientele, even though he was a white business owner. But it was an investment. It really makes sense to cater to your who was 40 to 45% of the Washington D.C. Population. And so he opens the shrimp boat along East Capitol. He recruits Jay Fletcher Wilder, who manages it until 1954, where Morris passes, and Fletcher purchases the building and then runs it for himself until about the 60s or 70s. It's still owned as a restaurant. There's a Lido's Pizza in there. You can see from a structural standpoint, the building conforms to the lot. It has one bay towards the front and then multiple bays along the side. And it really does have that simplest form. That we'll start to see minimum ornamentation along it, as well as you see highlights for the signage that's on the property. So if you remember the shrimp boat in its heyday, go ahead and put a thumbs up or whatever food that you enjoyed getting from there. I believe in the 90s or so, they started switching to soul food, which people thought was not shrimp boat's bag. But a really great architecture and building. Just kind of a little bit about the modernism that we'll see as we continue on. We're going to talk about kind of early modernism, or we're going to see some early modernism styles with the Prairie House. That's what we think about for Frank Lloyd Wright, those low pitched roofs with wide eave overhangs, craftsman style homes. You have the machine age movement with our mainstream modern, our international flat roofs with smooth surfaces. And then kind of a suburban model that banks really supported when they were providing financing. They kind of just had an archetype of the type of style that they preferred. It was called bankers modern. And then some of the forms we'll see are flat roofs, simplified forms, geometric forms, asymmetrical shapes, embedded block, and so forth. So let's take a look. Oh, before we even go there, I added the chef's table here because we're going to be walking at the top here is what it looks like. It's Conway Center. We're walking past it towards the BP, and we're going to cross the street towards 40th Street. But what used to be here was Chef's Table. This building was built in like 1944 as just like a little custard shop in the middle here, and then they expanded the wings out later on, kind of enclosed it, added this aluminum cupola and signage. And so I really just thought this was a fantastic building, just unique along the way, really representative of roadside architecture, kind of drawing people in from the road to the commercial space. But yeah, it was vacant for years in the 90s, and then there was a push for redevelopment along Benning Road. And so this was one of our lost treasures. Building together. As we cross the street and we stop in front of New Mount Calvary Baptist Church, we're going to talk about our architects who found collaboration and and unity in working with each other. We're going to see that a lot of the architects either worked with people that they were familiar with their they went to school with, and so forth, and they formed these coalitions that really become the leading firms in Northeast. Uh, the first kind of dynasty or firm that was formed within Northeast is the Woodson, Vaughn, and Ferguson Company. It used to be Howard Woodson and George Ferguson first, and then they included Vaughn afterwards. But Hillard Woodson is responsible, and their firm is actually responsible for the Suburban Gardens amusement park. If you're familiar with that, it was in Deanwood. Um, Built in the 1920s, 1922. It becomes the only African American amusement park in Washington, D.C. It stands as kind of a testament to architecture, to collaboration with different groups, construction groups, as well as rides and entertainment groups. They formed the Universal Development and Loan Company to provide loans to the service workers who were working at the park. So it was a real collaborative partnership among the architects and the partners. Howard Woodson is from Pennsylvania. He comes down to DC to work on portions of the roof for Union Station. He ends up coming to Northeast and begins his firm. He becomes the first president of the Northeast Boundary Civic Association. And these civic associations were serious about their neighborhoods. They knew that it was very hard to get funding within DC and to get Congress to care about the municipal issues that would occur within the city. And so you really had to have a great civic association in order to advocate for what your community needed. And so, that just kind of shows what he was about. He also was a part of the Far Northeast Business and Professional Association. He really was a big mentor toward architects in the area. George Ferguson, he becomes one of the instructors at Armstrong Technical High School. He also kind of develops the curriculum to feed into Howard University's architecture school. He serves in both World Wars, and he specializes in Art Deco and classical styles. And R.I. Vaughn is another instructor at the school. He specializes in church architecture with a more simplified Gothic form, which we will see in a second. So here we have our simplified Gothic architecture style. We have just our tower that projects out. We have our windows that are curved and still evoking a bit of style with the three parts. And then it's a clad right now in an aluminum. It probably would have been either a brick or a wood frame. So this is one of the first styles that you see. In general, there are so many churches that are constructed by African American architects in DC and in Northeast. This is just one of the many that the company that Woodson and his company did. And next, we're moving right along to Giles. And if you are familiar with architecture in DC, Louis Giles comes up a lot because he his firm spread from northeast to southwest to you can find his property, a building he's built in almost every quadrant of DC. He studies at Armstrong Technical School. He's drafted into World War One as a cartographer. He ends up going from there to University of Illinois, Urbana, which we spoke about for George before. He was the first. And so then you have Giles coming in next. He is influenced by Georgian architecture. So his styles are rather simple, Georgian symmetric styles. And he does family homes, apartments, and churches. He ends up forming a consulting firm with his son, who also becomes an architect. So they were really building dynasties out here to continue their legacies of constructing and designing within the city. Johnny Melby, we see his properties not as frequently. They're just a few. He works a lot in Maryland as well, in Prince George's County. He studies at a university, at Clark University, and transfers to University of Illinois. He was in Alabama at Tuskegee Institute. He starts his career with Samuel Plateau, who we don't talk about here too much, but he is another influential architect out of, I believe, Ohio too. And then Melby completes about 200 buildings within Washington, D.C., including churches, houses, and stores. Oh, and just in this corner here, I just wanted to say I love this directory, the DC Directory of 1948, if it's in Washington. It's a African American kind of green book, but it's really cool to walk through. So as we're passing along past the church, we come in front of 4254 Benning Road. Our architect is Louis Giles, and it's constructed in 1931. Oh, wait, I'm sorry. This one right here, the architect's unknown, the brick building. So this brick building we'll start with the 4256, which is the first one we see. And we're looking at the simplified stone and simplified form. We have our projections kind of at the corners, and then our rectangle shape facing into a courtyard. So this is a colored, this was originally a colored apartment that was built in the 1950s. And so I really like how this chimney kind of protrudes out, and you'll start to see how they start to use these brick projections as almost columns on the properties. And so yeah, I really thought that this little duplex here, or this two facing twin apartments, was a very interesting style. Next beside it, as we keep walking, is this 4254 here. I don't know if you can see my arrow, but it's built by Louis Giles in 1931. So this is here prior to the apartments. It was originally like a one-story, and it's just been altered into a two-story here. So this is an altered version of what was originally there. But on the other side, we have here 4244 and 4246 Benning Road. And that is by the Morris brothers, who graduate from Armstrong as well. And they're kind of celebrated as a construction brothers group. All right, we're gonna move faster. So here we're passing by New Grove Missionary Baptist Church, built in 1978. You kind of start seeing here how the bricks kind of create these nice little columns here, and this overhanging eave on the roof. And so Have architect unknown. I haven't discovered him yet, but I will. And then as we keep moving over, we have this property here built by Cyril Buck. And so we'll talk a little bit about them. I'll move a little faster. The Cassell family is a major architecture family in Washington, D.C. They work at Howard University. Albert Cassell is responsible for the Howard University plan. His brother works with him and then goes off to do his own construction and engineer work in D.C. He ends up designing buildings by a lot of African American architects, and becomes the assistant director to the building and grounds for the GSA in DC. And then Cyril Bow, who works as Oliver Cassell's draftman. They were classmates in school, and he ran a small practice, really popular in the Howard University space. Then below we have R.C. Archer, and he right here in the corner, he establishes his own practice with his father in Norfolk. He serves in World War I. He comes down, he into DC and opens his practice in 1921. So again, this 1920s is when you really start seeing an influx of African American architects coming into the city. He attains his license right after Langford, and he becomes well known for training African American architects and as his apprentice. He receives the Washington, D.C. Board of Trade design for Supreme Design in 1954. So very much influential. But this one right here, 4236, I really wanted to stop and look at this embedded block here with our decorative corbelling. So because there wasn't a lot of ornamental design, we weren't putting brackets or parapets on a lot of properties. Then there was a lot of sense of creativity with the brick. And so this is really a great example of showing how that creativity, especially towards with a recessed entrance, using that as a cover, just one of my favorites. Next is an R.C. Archer property built in 1945. It has similar kind of style where it brings you into that center bay, that entrance bay, and then with the brick coins kind of along that entrance way. The barbershop on the corner here is one of the longstanding barbershops in the area. I believe it's been there since the 1960s. So very cool. You can see the art, the brick corbelling at the top too, and how it kind of dents in and creates and gets some depth to the additional parapet at the top. So as we move on. So at the top here at 4234, this used to be here. This was a Giles property built in 1931, your standard prairie style property with a porch, an overhang, and kind of centralized entrance. This was demolished, and we have now here this gray and white property. So you can decide and put in the comments if you think it's a compatible kind of substitute for what was there. I think it does flow with the character of the neighborhood, and I think it flows nicely with that R.C. Archer building. 4208. We have a Bow and Castell property here. What I really love are the detailing on the corners, as well as you can see in the front here with the around the door surrounds. You have a projection that is common that you see, and then this brick at the top where it's normally a glass brick or a picture window. But it really does show kind of how they use the brick detailing. It's even curved in a very lovely style. low scale property, low scale commercial property. And then here we're getting to the corner. So I'm going to move a little faster. So we're here at Fort Minnan Park. The park system was designed to defend DC. The Mannings who owned the property fled to the Confederates. The wife stayed on the property while the Union was there. Contraband workers or enslaved individuals came to clear out a lot of that land on Fort Manham. They used some of that material and they may have taken it over to Dingwood to begin building their own properties, starting the foundations of the area. And on the corner of Fort Manham Park, or the site, was the colored school Smothers, which is often talked about as one of the first schools for African Americans in DC. So here we have the 6th District headquarters. We're looking across the street, built in 1949, not by African American architect, but really in that style we were discussing, simplified, projecting braids, have concrete and brick associated with them, low scale. The Boys and Girls Club, 1990s building actually, so it doesn't necessarily fit in the time span, but it's a wonderful building, and we would have been passing it. I could not stop and say something about the curved architecture of this. You kind of have that streamlined modern going with the punch windows here, and yeah, so I'm not going to dwell on that, but it's beautiful property. The last property I really wanted to stop on is the Stewart Funeral Home. I love this building. Started by a Black legacy building, John T. Stewart. He starts his business in Sea Pleasant and moves his funeral home to H Street. His son takes over the business with his wife in 1940s, and then he builds this facility, Benning Road, in 1964. Don H. Roberts is the architect for the property. He had served in World War II. He was a professor at University of Howard University School of Architecture, and one of the first African Americans to study, I think only under Frank Lloyd Wright. So really interesting history here, but just looking at the forms, we see how the brickwork is really emphasized with this property. He uses them more as columns, but also with a flat facade on the front to really draw the eye away from this kind of entrance here. So it's what a beautiful piece of architecture. All right, then we're going down past Benning Road. It's built in 1962. The library serving the area. The community was really advocating for getting a library in the area. And so when Benning Road opened, it was really celebrated. And this becomes a nice civic block. Then we kind of merge over to our Renaissance or our retail area. On the corners, as we look across from the Stewart Funeral Home, are a few homes that are built by African American architects. One is Gustavus Bull. This property was built in 1941, but really kind of we're seeing the change from residential to retail. Here we have some more Giles and another brother duo coming into the conversation, which is Randolph Dodd and Jacob Dodd, brothers who run a construction company as well, fabulously for constructing properties in Dingwood, Benning, and as well as Eastland Gardens, which I'll talk about a little bit at the end, which we're getting to soon. If we look on the other side, we have the Senator Theater. It serves a white audience, but then there's Langston Theater down by the golf course that serves the African American audience. But that structure with its Art Deco style, the front facade is the only thing that remains. That's historic to the building, but really emphasizing that Art Deco modern style. And then as we walk down Minnesota Avenue, we kind of see a change, and I'm just kind of going to go based off of in the last 2000s, 2009 to 2011, and then, oh, there we go. And then kind of we see what is there now, and really gives a change to the feel of the street. As you go, it feels more transient, more commercial. So lastly, we're coming to Friendship Academy, which was the former Carter G. Woodson High School, built in 1955, services the community of that area. So 55 was kind of leaning more towards the integration side, so it would have served both African American and white students. So I believe I made it to the end. Thank you, thank you, thank you so much for joining me. I hope that you all got a lot of information and that I was clear enough through it. I want to just finally kind of leave you with some places to go to get more information. If we had kept going, we would have hit Eastland Gardens, which is a beautiful residential area filled with the same architects, but beautiful homes. We also have the Kingman Park story map. I talked about that historic district earlier in the talk. And then the National Training School for Women and Girls, which is in Deanwood, which also has a campus that used a lot of the architects to build the buildings there. So yes, I think that's it for me. Are there questions at the end, Zach?
Yeah,
How did I do?
that was excellent. That was a really fun virtual tour. And also, as I'm hearing the wind outside, I was really happy to be looking at the images you provided. Lots of great pictures, historical
Good.
and contemporary. Yeah, we have some questions and comments that have come in. So why don't we go through those? And of course, if you maybe have a question now or a comment, feel free to add it. It seems like the chat function maybe isn't working, so just plug any kind of commentary into the Q&A and we'll go through it. So the first is, I'd love more info on the house featured on the opening slide of the presentation. Is there anything specific about that house, or you just thought it was a cute little, what was it, like Tudor revival?
It was, and honestly, it was. So in the beginning, it was not just Benning Road. It was going to be like Deanwood and I did Capitol View. And so I believe that one was more in the Capitol View, East Capitol. I believe like J Street or Hunt Street. And so I was
Okay,
going to talk a bit more about the residential architecture, a residential mid-century architecture there. But I had to focus a bit more. But yes,
understandably.
and that one. But the one that was on the first slide that I had on there by Bull, Gustavus Bull, very unique, I think, for that area as a single family home. And you see those really tight gable roofs
Mhm.
that project out. So it's a really nice property. I think it's vacant now.
Oh,
So
okay.
very sad.
Yeah, I think maybe we'll have to do a future webinar tour focus more on the residential architecture, right?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
There's a lot of different stuff to cover. Is the Benning racetrack the same as the Mayfair racetrack?
So the Mayfair Mansions apartments were built on the land of the Benning racetrack.
Mm,
Yeah,
okay.
so that's the connection.
And Mayfair Mansions, I believe that's listed, right?
Yes,
Okay, yeah,
yes.
that's what I thought.
FSL property. Yeah.
Okay, cool. And then someone was asking about Archer's life and career, which I think you ended up covering, but they also wrote this additional comment, so I just want to share it. They said, Archer designed my church, Pleasant Plains Baptist Church in, um, I don't know how to say this word, Asoki, Hosky, Winton, North Carolina. Sorry about that. It was finished in 1949 and is similar to Hampton Palace and the 1917 Dunbar High School. Two of Haiti's leading architects, Albert Mangones and his son Frederick, also studied at Cornell.
Yeah, Cornell gets a really big shout out from the Black architects kind of education system, as well as I talked a lot about University of Illinois. But yeah, in addition to working in DC, a lot of these architects expanded outside of DC, going north and south.
Okay. And then just some commentary. I hope that the shrimp boat is around somewhere, if not on it. And then thumbs up for the shrimp boat. And then, of course, thank you for including Chef's Table as a lost treasure on Benning Road. I really liked that image too. And you mentioned the roadside architecture. You don't always get a lot of that in DC, so that was fun. And let's see what else. Yeah, the brick buildings look like they were meant to last. I mean, Amania, that's why we love historic buildings, right? They really are built to last compared to current construction. And then someone said, would the Stewart Funeral Home originally had been unpainted red brick?
No, no, it was always the white brick. It's like a concrete almost.
Okay.
It's not painted. That is the color because it's a mix of concrete and like a brick stone that they have that they use for it.
Okay.
But yeah, I for the funeral home, I am reaching out to them to see about designation for their property. I think it's just what a classy building.
Mm-hmm.
It has that really nice on canopy that comes that you don't normally see for funeral homes, and just it's just a really nice property.
Yeah, it is. And I believe there is at least one funeral home listed in the DC inventory, possibly. I can't remember the name off the top of my head. So that is a
It's
possibility.
not Stewart,
Yeah,
so
it's not Stewart. And what I was going to say too is we did a walk maybe a few months ago up on Kennedy Street Northwest, and there was a lot of funeral homes. And you realize that those are a really significant legacy business around town. And a lot of them have really fantastic architecture, whether it's, a little bit more traditional or modernist.
No, I think this one was interesting. I believe Stewart's son, the junior, had gone to architecture school, had a little bit of backing in his early creative years before he, I guess, went into the family business. So I think he really was in tune with the style and with the type of statement he wanted to make with
Yeah.
the new property. So Don Roberts, who is the architect for the property. It's not well known. Seems to be well known in the kind of Howard University of realm of architects. I have a few buildings that he constructed that were residential, but nothing at this level I found so far. So, and then his connection to Frank Lloyd Wright really elevates, I think, this property up to
Yeah, that's
a
really
significant
interesting.
status. Very interesting. Yeah.
Uh-huh. And then someone else was just saying the topic is very apropos to it being Black History Month, so thanks so much.
Oh yes, of course. Of course. Yeah, I hope you guys got a lot of good Black history facts in there to tell your friends as the month goes on.
Yeah. But regardless, we got to do this tour
Oh
whenever
yeah.
the year. Yeah.
No, I think that too. And then please take a look at the Eastland Garden tour, or the map that I put at the end. I really think it's a great opportunity to look at I didn't talk a lot about the residential just because this time frame is focused about it had a lot of apartment styles, but if you want to look at the residential styles that these architects built, Eastland Gardens really does give you that feeling of being within that suburban space. And maybe there could be a tour for that. That would be really,
And
I
that
think, a
one's on
wonderful
DC
one.
Historic Sites, I believe,
Yeah.
correct?
Yes.
Oh yeah, I
Yes.
can pop that into the chat so everyone can go check that out. And I believe you guys, your staff put that together on our
Yeah, Kim
website.
Williams did. So, and then there's another, and she also did the Kingman Park story map. And so that one's a really excited, really important one, I think, to include when we're talking about preservation. And
Mhm.
just kind of a little plug here for the preservation side of all of this. I'm doing this research and I'm engaging folks in the stories because a lot of times there are missed gems when it comes to what we appreciate and what we remember to appreciate. And so I think it's important to remember to appreciate those that spend a lot of their craft and a lot of their time and energy into producing these really beautiful architecture structures. They were meant to last and they were meant to stand as a testament to the community that they were in.
Hmm.
And so as we go into Black History Month and we begin to celebrate just the excellence that is overcoming all of the prejudice that was put upon us, it's important to highlight this, our architects and our recent architecture.
Yeah.
I don't call it recent architecture because for some reason, John Langford is always in black and white. You would have thought this man lived in like 1882 or something
Uh-huh.
like
Yeah.
that. But for him to be a contemporary of Frank Lloyd Wright just kind of puts it in perspective of how close the timeline is. This is just not far back history. I do think this is a really more recent and something that we now have the opportunity to recognize and preserve and save. So continue
Absolutely.
to support your local preservation
Yes.
and continue to take these tours and explore DC.
Absolutely. And I think that, yeah, like I just shared in the chat the Eastland Gardens tour, and this is part of a collection of different neighborhoods that Kim Williams wrote up. And it covers, modernism and a lot of the architects that designed these buildings. I believe they came out of Howard. Is that correct?
Yeah, they came
And
out of Howard, they came out of Armstrong, they came out of Cornell. There's a variety, but and also they came from different states too. So there
mhm,
were Lewis Giles is nice because he's a local DC born architect, maybe Virginia DMV. But then you have people like Woodson who comes from Pennsylvania who really just takes it upon himself to make DC his home
yeah.
and elevate it. So really great kind of variety there.
Yeah, and also the thing I like about those tours and also like the stuff you covered today is it's not like these buildings and these structures are necessarily designated. And I think sometimes as preservationists, we get so hyper focused on designated buildings, but you realize there's a lot of great architecture and history that just hasn't been formally recognized yet, and maybe can be, added in the future to the inventory. Um, okay, so anyway, back to we got too excited talking about all this other preservation stuff. I'll get back to the comments and questions. So someone just said, exceptional presentation. I worked this area as a realtor and still do for many years and did not know all this history, so thank you. And then another person said, thank you, Imania. Until I Am Dust, John Whitelaw Lewis is an excellent book on Capitol View. Excellent presentation. I don't know, is that a book that you've referenced or cited or anything?
No, but John Whitelaw Lewis would be like my Hechinger or somebody like his hand is honestly and just his story is fascinating.
Hmm.
I am the reviewer for U Street and so I work a lot with his buildings and just his name pops up a lot there. And to have seen his name come up on in Northeast and just all the work and actually he goes into Prince George's County and he begins to start to develop over there. And you see his name in Fairmont Heights and Capitol Heights and all of that. And so, yes, that is a book. If anyone would love to write all of this down, or get together as a research team, I think it's a fabulous story. Yeah,
Hmm.
yeah, I agree.
Absolutely. And then someone wanted to mention that Archer also designed Capitol View Baptist Church on
Yes.
East Capitol and Division Avenue. That's a building that DC Preservation League has looked at over the years as a possible, historic landmark. Let's see.
And then while he's talking too, I just want to plug
Yeah.
in the National Trust, which has the National Trust for Historic Preservation has a conserving modernism grant that they are pubbing right now, that they have been doing for the last couple of years. And so I believe this kind of has sparked a lot of the conversation on
Hmm.
Black modernism and like what it means and nationwide. And so it's really exciting to be able to explore modernism in this kind of world with other folks. We're coming into a new, what I call like a preservation generation, meaning that a new amount of buildings are coming into their 50-year, 70-year mark.
Hmm.
They need to be evaluated for their significance so that when development comes, they can be accounted for as a cultural resource. So yeah, it's and Capitol View too was a whole separate one. I wanted to do guys, I was gonna have y'all walking. We were gonna walk from all the way East Capitol
Right.
with
I remember when we were
circles.
first talking about this, and we're like, oh, we got to narrow this down.
We gotta get a spot. But yes, Capitol View too. I wanted to include that so much because it just has a lot more architecture within it as well.
Hmm.
So for sure, thank you for
I
putting
think a
that in.
series, I think a series is coming together, a tour series. I like where this is going.
Oh, I like it. I like it. And people start, oh, I don't think I put my email address on there. It's imania.price@dc.gov. If you have any stories or you have any pictures of properties from the 1940s, 50s, 60s, please share, please upload or send them out. We're trying to get them into DCPL, DC Public Library System. But there's just not enough, I think, of photos documenting the journey of
Yep.
the development. So
Yeah,
please
I just
share those and or find them in your drawers. Go ahead, start bringing those things out.
right, and I just put your email into the chat so people
Perfect.
can copy and paste that. Okay, so thank you. Someone else is saying that. You're getting a lot of thank yous. Are all of the architects you cited included in the Office of Planning's architect directory? Also, exactly where was the amusement park in the ad? I've seen ads before, but I didn't see a precise location.
So the first question was, are all the architects in our architect directory?
Yeah.
Most of them were. Giles, Dodd, most of them are in there. I don't Roberts wouldn't be in there. He was not in there. Who else was like Morrison? The Morrison brothers weren't in there. They're kind of mentioned. Who else? Oliver Cassell. I don't think Oliver Cassell's mentioned because honestly, there is a difference between like an engineer or a civil engineer or builder, quote unquote builder, and an architect. So sometimes things are listed as builders. So our Oliver Cassell is kind of more referenced as a builder than he is referenced as an architect. And
Mhm.
so a lot of times he might not be referenced in our architect's books just because he was more noted as a builder than he was an architect. So though that kind of difference would be in there. And then the second question was,
Oh, about the amusement park and where exactly that was
oh,
located.
so where suburban garden apartments.
Mhm.
And right now there, I want to say, I don't know what precinct it is, but it's Hayes Street.
Oh,
Hayes
uh-huh.
Street, and there's the police department that's like right there. Imagine where that police department is was like the entrance, and then
Okay.
behind that was Suburban Garden Amusement Park.
Okay.
And then they went into and like around the Great Depression, it really fell into some financial problems. It was bought by a white investor who was kind of like buying up all kinds of like amusement parks and like
Hmm.
entertainment things in the 1930s. It didn't do well. He didn't manage it well, and it ends up closing. And then they sell the property for like scraps really quick, and then it turns into public housing in like literally less than 3 years.
Oh, wow.
So yeah, the change from amusement park to the apartments was so fast. It was kind of sad that you didn't really, I think the people there almost didn't experience it as quickly as, or realize the loss that they had there
Mhm.
as quickly. But there was yes, but yes, in general, Hay Street is where the entrance would be to the
Yeah, and I just dropped the architect directory in the chat if anyone wants to take a look at that. And then I just put we actually have, even though it's not standing anymore, we actually have an entry for suburban gardens on DC historic sites. And so if you click on that link I shared, and you'll go to the bottom of the page, you'll see a map where we've pinned where generally the amusement park was for anyone who is interested right there on Hay Street. Okay. Obviously out of the scope of the webinar's geography, but I love Hilliard Robinson, Langston Dwellings, of course, and Charles I. Bryant, Dunbar High School, I'm assuming the original, and River Terrace's AME Zion Church.
top. It's all good ones. Yeah, that's why I said Northeast. We could go. We can span the. We can expand the architects because we didn't even touch on Robinson, which if you're thinking about Langston Terrace apartments and the public housing, he was influential in that project as well as in Northeast. There was a whole thing that I wanted to talk about when it comes to investments
Mhm.
into the building, into the construction. While that we talked a little bit about FHA, we didn't really talk about the investors who were purchasing property. And like Gott was the investor for a lot of the properties that were in Capitol View. He was a white investor. So he bought the properties, he would sell them to Capitol View, and Capitol View would like build them. And so there was this really intricate relationship between the bankers, the investors, the real estate agents, and or the realty firms, and then the construction firms. There are documents of architects suing the government for wages that they didn't receive, for work they didn't think, or folks suing architects for work they didn't think was done. So it's a really interesting time in like the 1930s, 1940s, especially when you look at how money and finances were managing
Mhm.
development.
Yeah, absolutely. And then someone was asking, is the Whitelaw Library building on 13th Northwest near you a Whitelaw architect creation?
The Whitelaw Library. I think I'm
I know,
familiar
because I
with
know the
this.
old Whitelaw Hotel is at
Yeah,
13E.
yeah, T.
Yeah, but I don't know if there's a library building there. Maybe,
I don't think so.
okay.
I don't think that one is, but I don't know. I'm not familiar with the properties. I can't speak on
Yeah,
it.
yeah,
But the
right, right.
hotel, there's a hotel, I think a White Lard Market across the street from there.
Oh, right, uh-huh.
Um, 2001, 2001, uh, 9th Street or 10th Street, is a Giles building, Bohemian Caverns. Bohemian
Oh,
Caverns
right,
used to
uh-huh.
be owned by Whitelaw Lewis. He had his offices in there. It was constructed by Giles, and it was another kind of Whitelaw building that's not technically talked about as a Whitelaw building, but his buildings are everywhere. I wouldn't be surprised to see that.
And he's also Industrial Savings Bank, right? There's that
Yeah, it's an
great bank
industrial
on the
savings
corner.
bank.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, that's a great
Mm-hmm.
building.
I believe it's a Houghton building, Isaiah Houghton. We don't even talk about Isaiah Houghton or William Pittman or any of the ones
Mm-hmm.
that, that are also deep DC architects who have a real, who are influential into kind of this 1900s to maybe about 1960s architecture.
Yeah.
So we still, even with all of those, we were still limited by the folks we talked about.
And I think that's what's so exciting about the new study we're doing on Black architects between DC Preservation League and you guys at HPO. I think there's gonna be so much interesting content that's gonna come out of that, and that people are gonna be talking about and learning about really for the first time, unfortunately. But that's why we do
Hmm.
these studies, right?
Yeah, and honestly, and I don't ever think of that it's the first time. I just think that with history, we have to just keep talking about it.
Yeah,
If we don't talk about it, it kind of gets lost. So we just kind of have to keep bringing it up. So I always think that I'm sure in the 1960s, it was such the talk of the town to have these architects and have that was just what they knew, and then not having any agency or kind of watching your history be demolished
yeah,
in the pursuit of progress, you know, and
yeah.
how and it time and I stopped at 1968. I really wanted to stop around the riots because or the riots, quote unquote, but you really do see a change from 1968 into the 70s and 80s in the architecture, in the style, in the preservation of historic buildings beforehand. So that even now you kind of see by 1960s, a lot of those buildings that are being that we have those large commercial shopping centers and so forth are taking the place of these 2-story, 3-story commercial brick buildings that we used to have all along rows. And so you see a kind of a large scale demolishing of those for hotels, for parking, for shopping centers, for transit, and so forth. And so as the city expands, we begin to lose more and more history. And so
Mhm.
it's just kind of a fluid kind of conversation. So yeah, not the first time. I'm sure
Yeah.
we're going to keep having this conversation over and over. But I'm really thankful that I was given the opportunity to talk with you all today.
Yeah, really, really great points. So, with that said, Imania, there's a couple questions that are a little bit more like forward thinking, and so I want to get your thoughts on this. The first one is, I know you and I get this question all the time. What are the pros and cons of attempting to get a building historically designated? And I know that's a broad question, but can you give us an answer in the context of the Benning Road area?
So in the context of Benning Road area, I think what the benefit would be um is a community response to development that comes in. So we saw that we had that in the beginning slide I showed you there was a Giles, a little home between two apartment buildings,
Mhm.
and that land is zoned for another apartment building. And without designation, there is no protection on that little Giles house or any of the properties around. And so there, without that protection, then a developer who might be from another state, who might not know the history of the buildings or appreciate it, has the ability to develop without community input. And so what preservation does is it gives the additional layer of community involvement, of communication with the developer. Then those things are really vital in a space where there's not a lot of recourse to do things that you don't technically own. And so preserving that character is why I would be the benefits. I guess the con, I don't really, it's my job. I don't think there's
Yeah,
a con to
you don't
it
have
at
to
all.
say that part.
I don't think there's a con to it at all. These are all tools to help the community protect itself from things that might uh destroy or reduce the value of why people come there in the first place. And
Hmm.
so I never think there's a con. I just think that there are people who use the tool differently. And so some person can use preservation as a tool to get something that they're trying to do, or someone can use it as a tool to protect something that they need to
Yeah,
protect. It's
that's
it's just how you use it.
really well said. Yeah. So along these lines, so someone said or asked, generally, what are the cost considerations between rehabbing a significant architectural building and demolishing it? And then how can communities use the existence of historic buildings to prevent destructive forms of gentrification after a community is designated historic? or architecturally significant. Um, do you have any thoughts just generally on that? And I know
I
and
know you
this,
guys
there's
are
no
getting
designation
deep.
in
You
this
guys
area.
are getting deep.
I
Okay,
know.
so I'm just kind of gonna give it for an immediate type of call to action, I would
Yeah,
say,
that
for
sounds
it,
great.
which is you use the properties that are in the worst shape as your trial properties. I we can How can I get a corporation like Howard University or Phelps Training School to come out and look at the property and give it an assessment.
Mhm.
That's one thing that we don't have in general is a good assessment on the buildings. Who is saying that it's blighted? Is it blighted because the walls have fallen down, or is it blighted because it's missing windows? And
Yeah.
so what are the conditions of that actual property? And then and who are making that determination? I think at this stage for preserving our African American history. It's getting qualified people to really take an educated look at our historic properties and making sure that the assessments are being done appropriately. As we know, there's a very high percentage or a very high interest in saying something is decrepit. It's okay, we can demolish it because it is cheaper to knock something down and build something new. I will say there is you can cheaply do that.
Yeah.
But a cheap building is not going to last you as long as that historic building has been standing.
Hmm.
And so, because of that, if you invest that money into the maintenance of the property versus investing it into something that's only going to last 10 to 15 years, then you have a longer term of investment. But you have to think largely about the full scope of it. And so,
Yeah.
that's why I really wanted to start off with Howard Woodson's involvement with his civic associations, because having the builders and the construction workers as your leaders in your community meant that they weren't listening to whatever somebody was just going to tell them about their property or about their area. They were well versed. They knew their properties, they knew what they needed, and then they can advocate for it.
Hmm.
Having people on your civic boards who are knowledgeable about building maintenance, who are knowledgeable about what a building needs, are ways to help stave off demolition just because. Now, there are other worldly political things that people can get into about why we demolish and don't demolish things. But while we're in this local space of ours, it is important to treat our things with care and concern. And I think that is how you stave off kind of that negative impact.
Hmm. Yeah, and building on that, and then also circling back to the question about designation, I think, you know, designation is so important in what you just talked about because it opens up new opportunities for grants. Say you're a historic church that's been added to the National Register. And then, of course, the tax credit piece, right? As many of the people on this call are probably aware, there's a 20% federal rehab tax credit. It has to be for quote unquote income producing properties, but you can see how the incentive is created once you're added to the register. Amanya, I don't know if you want to add anything to the incentive
Yeah,
piece, but
so we do historic homeowners grant in our office. And that's for properties that are in historic districts that are designated historic districts. And so none of these that we talked about are within a designated historic district. And so there are no opportunities for that. And in general, it starts the track record of recording the history. Designation really does provide a vessel for building onto, and that's literal figuratively, of building onto the research and the information that you're getting for this property. A lot of the information that I looked at came from a determination of eligibility that we did for a lot of the projects. And the reason we did that was because the Benning Road Bridge and Transit Corp DDOT was doing a full scope redevelopment plan. And within that redevelopment, having the Historic Preservation Office as a part of the redevelopment plan meant that we were going in and looking at the properties and and saying, okay, this is how much history we have on this property. This is the significance of it. This is what the criteria it falls under for our standards. And so because of all of that, that really influenced the amount of information that we had just on the properties. And
Mhm.
so that process of doing that. And so the process of designating your community can at least give you something to build on. Same with Eastland Gardens. Eastland Gardens is still not a historic district, even though we want it to be. But there is a swath of information because of the push and drive to celebrate that
Yeah,
character. And so, regardless if it becomes designated or not, I know that there's a book out there that no develop like somebody can type in, oh, Eastland Gardens, what is that? And have so much information come through that there's no denying to a developer that's coming in, oh, this might be significant or not. So
yeah, yeah.
I'm down. I agree that designation is important, but the start of it, I think, really does gain a lot of information for the community.
Absolutely. Yeah, I'm so glad you mentioned the documentation piece. I mean, I think that when people think of organizations like DCPL, of course, they think of the designations because that's so much what we do. But really, a big chunk of our work is related to just documentation.
Yeah.
And a vast majority of the places we document are never going to be in the National Register, but it's important to create that record. So I'm so glad you added that.
Yeah. Yeah, the shrimp boat's another local landmark that constantly is looking at designation and how to make that work and what that means and what that looks like, especially when we talk about our more simplified and purpose-built buildings.
Hmm.
How are we reusing that? How if we designate it as the shrimp boat and we love it as a shrimp boat, does it stay as a shrimp boat? Maybe we don't
Yeah,
do seafood anymore. Like
yeah.
so like the reuse part of it really starts to come into play as well. And so I think that it's still I believe that even though it's hard to advocate for more modern style buildings as we kind of progress, I feel like the National Park Service has been more open lately to looking and reviewing at those properties and seeing them in a different light.
Mhm.
So, it doesn't, if it didn't work in 2001, it might work in 2026. So
Yeah.
keep pushing for the designation.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think also what you're getting at too is having a more flexible approach to the integrity standard. And I think younger preservationists coming up are having a more flexible approach to integrity. And that's something that's going to continue to shift, I think, within the field in the coming years. Well, Imania, there is so much praise. I can't even get to all the positive comments about your presentation because it was excellent.
Oh,
And I
thank
think
you.
what this shows is we absolutely have to collaborate again on an in-person
Oh,
walk
yes.
tour when it's
Yes.
not, -4 or
I'm
whatever
feeling
it is outside.
Juneteenth right now. Juneteenth feels very, very much
I love it.
a welcoming time to do this. Nice and far out, but absolutely, we'll do
Yeah.
it again. And then if anybody has any questions, for sure, they can always reach me.
Yes, that sounds great. Yeah, I put your email, amania.price, right, at
Yes.
dc.gov. I got that right.
Yes.
So anyone can reach out. And yeah, I think basically we're going to collaborate again and we'll get something on
Yeah,
the calendar
always.
and keep everyone posted. I think we're going to have a big turnout. We're going to have to, maybe we're going to have to do a couple tours. I don't know.
Oh yeah, well, I'll put this one in the bag as something if you guys want to do one, just reach out and we'll get it going. So
Okay.
thank you so much for inviting me. Thank you all for listening and staying on as long as you did and asking your questions. It was really exciting.
Yeah, this was really fun. Thank you so
Good
much.
deal.
I can't thank you enough. This was excellent. Have a great weekend. Thank you, everyone.
You too. Everyone stay warm and safe. Bye.
Bye.